Dante Moretti stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city glitter beneath him like scattered diamonds. He owned half of it, the legal half, anyway. The illegal half paid better. Tonight he'd signed divorce papers with the same detached efficiency he used to approve shipments. Clean, simple, permanent. But Elena's final words still echoed in the silence. "We don't need you." Pride, he'd told himself, nothing more. He'd already moved on, hadn't he? Yet 6 months later, when he walked into that restaurant and saw her, visibly, unmistakably pregnant, those 3 words detonated like a bomb he never saw coming. If you're ready to discover how a ruthless crime boss learns that some battles can't be won with power, stay with me until the end. And when you do, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The law office occupied the 47th floor of the Castellane Tower, a gleaming monument to money and influence that pierced the downtown skyline like a steel blade. Inside, the conference room was all minimalist elegance, glass, chrome, and leather in shades of charcoal and winter white. No warmth, no sentiment. Exactly how Dante Moretti preferred it. He sat at the head of the polished table, perfectly still in his tailored Tom Ford suit, one hand resting casually on the armrest, while his attorney, Marcus Chen, shuffled papers with practiced efficiency. Across from him, Elena Rossi, soon to be Elena Rossi again, legally, signed each document her lawyer slid in front of her. Her hand moved steadily across the pages. No trembling, no hesitation. Dante watched her with the same clinical detachment he brought to board meetings and territorial negotiations. She'd changed her hair. Shorter now, just brushing her shoulders, darker than he remembered. Or maybe that was just the winter light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in shades of gray. They'd been married for 3 years, together for 4 before that. 7 years reduced to a stack of legal documents and 2 attorneys billing by the quarter hour. "Initial here, Mrs. Moretti," Elena's lawyer said, pointing to another line. The name sounded strange now, like a costume she was already shedding. Elena initialed without looking up. Marcus cleared his throat. "And that concludes the asset division. Everything has been allocated according to the prenuptial agreement signed prior to marriage. Mrs. Moretti waives any claim to—" "I know what I signed," Elena said quietly. Her voice carried none of the warmth Dante remembered from their early years. It was efficient now, businesslike. "I don't want anything that isn't mine." Dante's jaw tightened imperceptibly. There it was again, that subtle implication that nothing in his world was honestly earned. She'd never said it directly, never thrown his business in his face during arguments, but the unspoken accusation had hung between them for the last year of their marriage like smoke from a fire neither would acknowledge. "The Park Avenue apartment will remain in Mr. Moretti's name," Marcus continued. "The house in Southampton reverts to him as well, as per the prenup. Your personal accounts remain separate and unaffected. No alimony has been requested or offered." "I don't want his money," Elena interrupted, signing another page. Marcus blinked. "Of course. I'm simply clarifying for the record that—" "The record is clear," Elena said. She looked up then, meeting Dante's gaze for the first time since they'd sat down. Her dark eyes were calm, steady, and completely empty of the emotion he'd expected. No anger, no regret, just a cool professional distance that somehow felt worse than tears. "I want nothing from this marriage except to leave it." Dante leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You've made that abundantly clear." "Have I?" She tilted her head slightly. "Good. I'd hate for there to be any confusion." Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. "Perhaps we should take a short break." "No need," Dante said smoothly. "We're almost finished. Aren't we, Elena?" She smiled then, a small, tight curve of her lips that held no warmth whatsoever. "Yes, almost." The last few documents were signed in silence. Marcus gathered everything into a leather portfolio, his movements betraying relief that this had remained civil. Dante knew his attorney had prepared for worse. Screaming matches, last-minute demands, the kind of emotional warfare that turned divorces into bloodbaths. But this wasn't that kind of ending. This was something colder. "I'll file these with the court tomorrow morning," Marcus said, standing. "The dissolution should be final within 60 days, barring any complications." He looked at Elena with something approaching sympathy. Mrs. Moretti, if you have any questions during that period, I won't, Elena said, rising from her chair. She extended her hand to Marcus, then to her own attorney, thanking them both with the kind of gracious professionalism she'd perfected during her years as Dante's wife. All those charity galas and business dinners had taught her how to wear a mask as impenetrable as his own. Dante remained seated, watching her gather her coat and purse. She moved with the same elegant economy she always had, nothing wasted, every gesture purposeful. She'd been a dancer once, years ago. He'd loved watching her move through rooms, turning heads without trying. She'd given it up when they married. He'd never asked her to. Elena, he said as she reached for the door. She paused, her hand on the chrome handle, but didn't turn around. Take care of yourself. For a moment, she stood completely still. Then she looked back over her shoulder, meeting his eyes one last time. Something flickered in her expression, something he couldn't quite read. Sadness? Pity? Relief? We don't need you, she said quietly. Then she walked out. Dante sat alone in the conference room, those 3 words echoing in the sudden silence. Marcus had excused himself, sensing his client needed a moment. Through the windows, the city spread out beneath him in all directions. His city, built on money and fear and carefully maintained power. From up here, everything looked clean, orderly, under control. We don't need you. Not, I don't need you. We. He frowned slightly, turning the words over in his mind like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Who was we? Her family? She'd been close with her sister Gianna, though the 2 women had different approaches to life. Elena had chosen independence, even in marriage, maintaining her own career as a museum curator until when? Dante realized with a cold shock that he didn't actually know when Elena had left her position at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Sometime in the last year of their marriage, certainly. He'd been preoccupied with the expansion into the port territories, the delicate negotiations with the Russian syndicate, the internal challenge from Carlo Vetti that had required a very public, very final demonstration of power. By the time he'd looked up from that particular war, Elena had already moved out of their bedroom and into the guest suite. They'd been living as strangers, sharing an address. We don't need you. Pride, he decided. A parting shot designed to make him think she wasn't walking away alone, that she had support, that his absence wouldn't leave a crater in her life. Fine. Let her have her pride. He had an empire to run. Dante stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced precision, and left the conference room without looking back. The Moretti Empire operated from a 6-story building in Tribeca that officially housed an import-export company, a private equity firm, and a charitable foundation dedicated to urban renewal. Unofficially, it was the nerve center of one of the most sophisticated criminal organizations on the East Coast. Dante's office occupied the entire 6th floor. He arrived back from the divorce signing to find Vincent Castellane waiting in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Vincent was his oldest friend, his most trusted lieutenant, and the only person alive who could enter Dante's private office without an appointment. How'd it go? Vincent asked, not looking up from his phone. Efficiently. Dante crossed to the bar cart and poured 2 fingers of Macallan. She signed everything, no complications. That's good. Vincent finally glanced up. You okay? Dante raised an eyebrow. Why wouldn't I be? Vincent shrugged, pocketing his phone. Just checking. Divorce is supposed to be hard, even when it's the right call. It was the right call, Dante said flatly. He took a drink, feeling the whiskey burn pleasantly down his throat. We wanted different things. She wanted a husband who came home at 6 and asked about her day. I wanted a wife who understood that some meetings can't be scheduled and some questions shouldn't be asked. Fair enough. Vincent stood, crossing to the windows. Though if we're being honest, you weren't exactly present even when you were home. The last 6 months, you've been running on about 3 hours of sleep, buried in the port expansion and the Vetti situation. Not much room for romance in that schedule. Dante's expression cooled slightly. Your point? No point, just an observation. Vincent turned back to face him. So what now? You planning to take some time, or are we diving straight into the Colombo negotiations? The Colombo negotiations, Dante said immediately. We need to finalize the distribution channels before the end of the quarter. Every day we wait costs us market share. Vincent nodded slowly. Right. Business as usual. Did you expect something else? I guess I hoped you might take a breath, that's all. Maybe process. There's nothing to process, Dante interrupted, his tone sharp enough to cut. Elena and I were married. Now we're not. Life continues. Unless you have concerns about my ability to focus on work, I suggest we move on. Vincent held up his hands in surrender. Message received. I'll set up the meeting with Colombo for Friday. After Vincent left, Dante stood at the windows, looking down at the streets far below. People moved like insects along the sidewalks, rushing between buildings, living their small, ordinary lives. None of them knew that the man standing 40 stories above them controlled the flow of illegal goods through half the city, that his decisions affected their lives in ways they'd never comprehend. We don't need you. He finished his whiskey and pushed the thought away. Hartset. 6 weeks later, Dante attended a charity gala at the plaza. It was one of those necessary performances, wealthy donors paying exorbitant prices for mediocre chicken and the illusion of philanthropy while networking and showing off their latest acquisitions, whether those acquisitions were art, jewelry, or companions. Dante had brought Celine Marlowe. She'd appeared in his life through Marcus, actually, who'd mentioned in passing that his sister-in-law knew someone who might be suitable for social occasions requiring a companion. Translation: someone beautiful, intelligent, and discreet enough to understand that Dante Moretti wasn't looking for romance, just an elegant woman to fill the empty space at his side during events where appearing alone suggested vulnerability. Celine was perfect for the role. She had dark red hair that fell in calculated waves past her shoulders, green eyes that could convey interest without promise, and a background in art history that let her hold conversations with donors without Dante having to do more than occasionally nod. She wore designer gowns like armor and asked no questions about his business. She was, in every way, the anti-Elena. "Mr. Moretti," she said softly, her hand resting lightly on his arm as they moved through the ballroom. "Catherine Whitmore is approaching from your left. She's on the museum board, isn't she?" Dante glanced over, spotting the silver-haired woman navigating through the crowd with the determination of a heat-seeking missile. "She is, and she wants a donation." "How much?" "More than I plan to give." Celine smiled, a practiced curve of red lips. "Then I'll tell her you're feeling generous tonight, but haven't decided where to allocate your charitable budget. That should buy you an escape route." "Efficient," Dante murmured. "That's what you pay me for." Catherine Whitmore descended upon them with the intensity of someone who'd spotted her target and had no intention of letting it escape. "Dante, how wonderful to see you! And who is this lovely creature?" "Celine Marlowe," Celine said, extending her hand with flawless grace. "I work in art acquisitions. Dante and I have mutual interests in supporting the arts." "How delightful!" Catherine's eyes sharpened with interest. "Then you must convince him to contribute to our new Renaissance wing. We're raising funds for—" "Actually," Celine interrupted gently, "Dante was just mentioning that he's considering several charitable initiatives this quarter. The museum is certainly on his list, but he's also passionate about urban education programs. It's such a difficult decision when there are so many worthy causes." Catherine's expression flickered between annoyance and calculation. Of course! Education is vital. Though I hope you'll remember that the arts provide education as well, cultural education that enriches. I'm sure Dante will give it careful thought, Celine said warmly. Why don't I have his office reach out to you next week? That way you can send over detailed proposals for both the Renaissance Wing and any educational programs the museum supports. Then he can make an informed decision. It was a masterful deflection, promising nothing while appearing engaged, buying time while maintaining goodwill. Catherine recognized a skilled opponent when she saw one and gracefully retreated, making Celine promise to call. When she'd gone, Dante looked down at Celine with something approaching approval. Smoothly done. She'll send a proposal that goes straight to your assistant, who will send a polite rejection in 6 weeks citing budget constraints. You remain the generous supporter who simply had to prioritize other initiatives. Celine took a sip of her champagne. I've been to enough of these events to know how the game works. And you play it well. Thank you. She scanned the room with practiced efficiency. The Vanderbilts are at 3 o'clock, the Chengs at 9. Both have political connections you might find useful. There's also a state senator near the bar who looks like he's working up the courage to approach you. Dante followed her gaze. Anthony Breslin. He wants something. They always do. Celine tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful. You know, you could simply enjoy the party. Not everyone here wants to use you for something. Everyone wants something, Dante said quietly. The only variable is whether they're honest about it. Celine studied him for a moment, her green eyes unreadable. And what do I want, Mr. Moretti? Money, security, access to a world you couldn't enter without someone like me. He met her gaze evenly, which is fine because I want exactly what you provide. Competent companionship without emotional complications. We're both being honest about it. She smiled, but something in it looked almost sad. Yes, I suppose we are. They moved through the rest of the evening like synchronized dancers, Celine deflecting unwanted attention while facilitating useful connections, Dante playing the role of the successful businessman with philanthropic interests. It was a performance, carefully choreographed and flawlessly executed. When he dropped her off at her Upper East Side apartment later that night, she paused before getting out of the car. Dante? Yes? Are you happy? The question caught him off guard. He looked at her, this beautiful woman who asked for nothing beyond a generous monthly retainer and the occasional expensive gift, and realized he had no idea how to answer. Happiness is overrated, he said finally. Stability, control, those things matter more. Celine nodded slowly. If you say so. She stepped out of the car, then leaned back in. But for what it's worth, I think you're lying to yourself. She closed the door before he could respond. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Dante sat in a private room at Osteria Lucano, a restaurant in the West Village that served two purposes, providing exceptional Italian cuisine to discerning diners and hosting very private meetings for very private business. The owner, Luca Santoro, was on Dante's payroll. So was the chef. The restaurant had a second kitchen in the basement where certain deliveries were repackaged before being distributed through a network of suppliers who asked no questions. Upstairs, the wealthy and influential enjoyed truffle risotto and expensive wine, completely unaware that they were eating above one of the city's most efficient money laundering operations. Tonight, Dante was meeting with the Colombo family to finalize the port distribution agreement he'd been negotiating for months. Vincent sat to his right, silent and watchful. Across the table, Marco Colombo nursed a glass of Barolo and tried to look like he wasn't nervous. He should be nervous. The Colombo family was second tier at best, and they knew it. This deal would elevate them, give them access to shipping routes and distribution channels they could never secure on their own. But it would also put them in Dante's debt, and everyone in this room understood what that meant. So we're agreed, Dante said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. You handle the waterfront logistics. My people manage transport and distribution. Revenue split is 60-40 in my favor. Marco's jaw tightened. 60-40 is steep, Moretti. We're providing the infrastructure. I'm providing the protection, Dante interrupted smoothly. Without my umbrella, your operations last maybe 6 weeks before the feds or the Russians shut you down. With me, you operate indefinitely and sleep soundly at night. That's worth 20%. Marco exchanged a glance with his cousin Roberto, who sat beside him looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. 55-45, Marco tried. Dante didn't blink. 60-40. Or you walk out of here and try your luck with the Russians. I hear they're very reasonable people to work with, very forgiving when things go wrong. The sarcasm hung in the air like a blade. Everyone at the table knew what happened to people who failed to meet their obligations to the Volkov organization. Dante's methods were cold, but they were clean. The Russians preferred spectacle. Marco's shoulders sagged slightly. 60-40. Excellent. Dante lifted his wine glass in a mock toast. To profitable partnerships. They were sealing the agreement when Dante's attention was caught by movement near the main dining room. Through the partially open door, he could see one of the waitresses moving between tables. A slender woman with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her movements efficient despite the heavy tray she balanced on one shoulder. Something about the way she moved made him look twice. The angle was wrong, the lighting was dim, and she was wearing the standard server's uniform of black pants and a white shirt. Nothing distinctive, but something in the set of her shoulders, the careful grace of her movements, triggered a memory so visceral that his chest tightened. No, it couldn't be. Elena had left New York. Vincent had mentioned it casually about a month after the divorce was finalized. He'd run into Gianna at some event, and she'd said Elena had moved away. Not where, just away. Dante forced his attention back to the table, where Marco was still talking about logistics and timeline, but his mind was elsewhere, distracted by the ghost of a woman he'd convinced himself he was over. When the meeting finally concluded and Marco and Roberto had left, significantly lighter in power than they'd arrived, Vincent turned to Dante with a knowing look. You okay? You zoned out there for a minute. I'm fine. Just tired. Right. Vincent stood, stretching. Want to grab dinner while we're here? Luca's chef does an incredible... No, Dante said too quickly. I need to get back to the office. Vincent raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. Suit yourself. I'll have the contracts drawn up by tomorrow. After Vincent left, Dante sat alone in the private room, fighting the urge to walk into the main dining area and confirm what he already knew couldn't be true. Elena was gone. And even if by some coincidence she was working at a restaurant that happened to be one of his fronts, it didn't matter. They were divorced. Finished. We don't need you. He stood abruptly, heading for the exit without looking toward the dining room. But as he passed through the doorway, he couldn't help it. He glanced left, scanning the tables. The waitress with the dark hair had her back to him, taking an order from a couple near the windows. She laughed at something the man said, a soft sound that Dante felt in his chest like a punch. She turned slightly, giving him a view of her profile. Dante stopped breathing. It was Elena. Not a ghost, not a coincidence. Elena, his ex-wife, who should have been anywhere in the world except here, working as a waitress in his restaurant. And she was pregnant. Very, very pregnant. The tray slipped slightly in her grip, and she adjusted it with practiced ease, one hand bracing her lower back in a gesture Dante had seen 1,000 times from women in their third trimester. She was far enough along that there was no hiding it, no mistaking it. Dante's mind raced through calculations with ruthless precision. The divorce had been finalized 4 months ago. They'd been separated for 2 months before that, which meant his blood turned to ice. If Elena was that far along, if the timing was what it appeared to be, then there was only one possible conclusion. The baby was his. We don't need you. Suddenly, those 3 words took on an entirely different meaning. Dante stood frozen in the doorway, his entire world tilting on its axis while the noise of the restaurant washed over him like static. His mind, trained for decades to calculate odds and anticipate threats, struggled to process this new information, to integrate it into the careful structure of his life. Elena moved between tables with the same quiet efficiency she'd brought to everything, her hand occasionally resting on her rounded stomach in an absent, protective gesture. She looked tired, thinner than he remembered, despite the pregnancy. Her face had lost some of its softness, gained new angles that spoke of stress and long hours. She was working, not at a museum, not in the career she'd spent years building, working as a waitress. Why? The question hammered in his mind, demanding answers. Elena had refused alimony, refused any claim on his assets. But her family had money, not wealth like his, but enough that she shouldn't have been struggling, unless she'd cut herself off from them too. Unless she'd chosen this isolation deliberately. We don't need you. Dante's hands curled into fists at his sides. She'd known. When she'd sat across from him in that conference room, signing papers with that infuriatingly calm expression, she'd known she was carrying his child. And she'd said nothing. The betrayal of it hit him like a physical blow. Then Elena looked up. Their eyes met across the crowded restaurant, and Dante watched every drop of color drain from her face. Her hand flew to her stomach in an instinctive protective gesture, her entire body going rigid with something that looked like fear. Fear. Of him. That realization hurt more than the secret itself. Dante started moving toward her without conscious thought, navigating between tables while Elena stood frozen like a deer in headlights. The restaurant noise faded to background static. Laughing conversations, clinking glasses, the smooth jazz playing from hidden speakers. All of it meaningless compared to the roaring in his ears. He'd almost reached her when she suddenly turned and walked quickly toward the back of the restaurant, moving as fast as her condition allowed. Dante followed, his longer strides eating up the distance. She pushed through a staff door marked Employees Only, and he was right behind her. The door led to a narrow hallway lined with storage closets and a break room. Elena didn't stop until she'd reached the back exit, a heavy steel door that opened onto an alley behind the building. She shoved it open and stumbled outside, and Dante followed her into the cold November air. The alley was narrow and dimly lit, hemmed in by brick walls on both sides. Dumpsters lined one wall, and somewhere in the distance, Dante could hear the sound of traffic on 6th Avenue. Elena stopped about 10 feet from the door, her back to him, her shoulders rising and falling with rapid breaths. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Elena," Dante said finally, his voice low and carefully controlled despite the storm raging inside him. She didn't turn around. "You shouldn't be here. I own the restaurant." "I know." Her voice was quiet, almost resigned. "I've been careful to work the shifts when you weren't scheduled to be here. Luca keeps me informed." So she'd known all along that this was his place. She'd chosen to work here anyway, hiding in plain sight behind scheduling and luck. "When were you planning to tell me?" Dante asked, the question coming out harder than he'd intended. Elena's shoulders tensed. "Tell you what?" "Don't." The single word cracked through the air like a whip. "Don't insult me by pretending. I can count, Elena. That baby is mine." She finally turned to face him, and the look in her eyes was something Dante had never seen before. Not anger, not fear, but a bone-deep weariness that made her look older than her 31 years. "Yes," she said simply. "The baby is yours." Dante had expected denial, or at least an attempt at deflection. The flat confirmation caught him off balance. "And you weren't going to tell me?" "No." No apology, no explanation. Just that single word, delivered with the same calm finality she'd brought to signing the divorce papers. "Why?" The question came out rougher than he'd intended, carrying all the confusion and anger he was trying to keep locked down. "Why keep this from me?" Elena wrapped her arms around herself, a protective gesture that had nothing to do with the cold. "Because you would have done exactly what you're doing now. You would have shown up, taken control, made decisions about our lives without asking what we actually needed." "What you need," Dante said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "is security, protection, resources to care for my child. Instead, you're working as a waitress, standing on your feet for hours while you're 7 months pregnant." 8, Elena corrected quietly. 8 months. The number hit him like a sledgehammer. 8 months. She'd been pregnant for 8 months, carrying his child while he'd been, what? Playing at romance with Celine? Like, expanding his criminal empire? Living his life as if Elena Rossi had never existed? "Jesus Christ," he breathed. "I'm fine," Elena said, and he could hear the steel in her voice now, the strength that had first attracted him to her years ago. "I'm healthy. The baby is healthy. We don't need—" "Don't!" Dante interrupted, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. "Don't finish that sentence, because we both know what you were going to say, and it's the same lie you told me 6 months ago." Elena lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without flinching. "It's not a lie. We genuinely don't need you, Dante. Not your money, not your protection, not your presence in our lives." "That's my child." He pointed at her stomach, his control beginning to fray at the edges. "Mine. You don't get to make unilateral decisions about—" "Yes, I do." Elena's voice was quiet but absolute. "Because you made your choices a long time ago. You chose your empire over everything else. Over us. Over the family we could have been. And I'm not going to let my child grow up in the shadow of that world, waiting for the day when your enemies decide the best way to hurt you is through us." The accusation hung between them like smoke from a gun. "You think I can't protect you?" Dante said slowly. "I think protection isn't the same as safety." Elena's eyes softened slightly, and for a moment he saw a glimpse of the woman he'd married. "You're the most dangerous man I've ever known, Dante. Not because you're cruel, you're not, but because danger follows you like a shadow. Being close to you means being a target, always. And I won't do that to my child. Our child." "No." Elena shook her head, and there was something like pity in her expression. "Biologically, yes, but in every way that matters, this is my child. Because I'm the one who will be there every day. I'm the one who will make the sacrifices, put in the work, show up when things are hard. You'll be too busy with your empire, your wars, your carefully maintained power, just like you were too busy for our marriage." The words cut deeper than any blade because they were true. Dante had chosen his work over their relationship again and again, telling himself it was necessary, that once he'd secured this territory or neutralized that threat, he'd have time to focus on Elena. But there had always been another crisis, another challenge, another reason to prioritize power over presence. "It doesn't have to be that way," he said, and was disturbed by how much he sounded like he was pleading. "You can't," Elena interrupted gently, "because being who you are requires all of you. There's no halfway with you, Dante, no balance. It's all or nothing, and you chose all a long time ago." She was right. He knew she was right, but standing in this alley, looking at the woman who'd once loved him carrying a child he'd never known existed, Dante felt something crack in the careful armor he'd built around himself. "So what now?" he asked quietly. "You just disappear? Raise the baby alone, pretending I don't exist?" "I won't pretend you don't exist," Elena said. "When they're old enough to ask, I'll tell them the truth, that their father is a complicated man who made choices I couldn't live with. But I won't let you be a part-time presence in their life, showing up when it's convenient and disappearing when your business calls. Children need stability, Dante, and you can't offer that." Dante wanted to argue, wanted to demand his rights, wanted to use every tool at his disposal to force this situation back under his control. But looking at Elena's face, at the quiet certainty in her eyes, the protective way she held her stomach, he realized that none of his usual weapons would work here. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a boundary. "I could fight you," he said. "Lawyers, courts. I have resources, and I have nothing to lose," Elena countered. "You taught me that, actually. During the divorce, watching you operate, I realized that people can only be leveraged if they want something. I don't want your money. I don't want your name. I don't want access to your world, which means you have nothing to threaten me with." She was right again. Dante's power came from understanding what people valued and using it as leverage. But Elena had deliberately stripped herself of everything he could touch: wealth, status, connections. She'd made herself invulnerable by making herself invisible. It was brilliant and infuriating in equal measure. "You can't ask me to just walk away," Dante said, and heard the rawness in his own voice. "Not from my own child." Elena's expression softened slightly. "I'm not asking you to walk away. I'm asking you to stay away. There's a difference." Before he could respond, the back door banged open and Luca appeared, his expression worried. "Elena, you okay? Your break ended 10 minutes ago, and—" He spotted Dante and froze. "Mr. Moretti, I didn't realize you were still here." "Give us a moment," Dante said without looking at him. Luca hesitated, clearly torn between obeying his employer and checking on Elena. Elena made the decision for him. "It's fine, Luca. We're done here." She started moving toward the door, navigating around Dante carefully, as if getting too close might burn her. "I need to get back to my tables. Elena, please don't come to the restaurant again when I'm working," she said quietly, pausing in the doorway. "It's hard enough without this." Then she was gone, leaving Dante standing alone in the alley with Luca, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "How long has she been working here?" Dante demanded. Luca shifted uncomfortably. "About 3 months. She needed work, came in asking if we had any openings. I didn't know I didn't know about the history. She said her name was Elena Rossi, and I had no reason to question it. Because she'd gone back to her maiden name, of course she had." "Why didn't you tell me?" Dante asked. "She asked me not to." Luca met his eyes, his expression apologetic but firm. "Said she needed the work and didn't want any special treatment. What was I supposed to do?" Dante stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked out of the alley without another word. He didn't go back to the office. Instead, Dante drove aimlessly through the city, his mind churning through everything Elena had said, trying to find an angle he'd missed, a way to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely beyond his reach. "We don't need you." Now those words made perfect, devastating sense. Not just Elena speaking for herself, but for the child she was protecting. The child she'd decided was better off without him. Was she right? The question haunted him as he navigated through traffic, watching the city blur past his windows. Was she right that his world was too dangerous, that the child would be safer growing up invisible to his enemies than acknowledged as his heir? Was she right that he couldn't be trusted to show up consistently, that his empire would always come first? Dante thought about his own childhood, about a father who'd been more myth than man, a distant figure who'd appeared occasionally to deliver punishment or praise before disappearing back into his mysterious world of business. Dante had spent his entire childhood trying to earn moments of his father's attention, competing with an empire for scraps of affection, and he'd sworn he would never do that to his own children. Yet here he was, having built an empire that demanded everything, leaving nothing for the personal life he'd once imagined having. He pulled over on a quiet street in Chelsea, cutting the engine and sitting in the darkness. Through the windshield, he could see a small park where a few late-night joggers navigated the paths. Normal people, living normal lives, probably going home to normal families who didn't have to worry about federal investigations or rival organizations or the constant weight of maintaining power through fear and control. Elena had been right about one thing. He'd chosen this life. Every step of the way, he'd made decisions that prioritized expansion and dominance over everything else. And those decisions had consequences. His phone buzzed with a text from Vincent. Colombo, contracts ready for review. Also, Celine called. Wants to confirm dinner Friday. Should I respond? Dante stared at the message, thinking about Celine with her polished beauty and transactional companionship. She was perfect for the life he'd built, demanding nothing, offering just enough to maintain appearances. She would never ask him to choose between her and the Empire because she understood that the Empire was what made him valuable to her. She would never get pregnant and disappear, protecting a child from the darkness in his world. She would never look at him the way Elena had looked at him tonight, with sadness and resignation, like she'd already mourned what they could have been and moved on. Dante deleted Vincent's message without responding and pulled back into traffic, heading toward his penthouse with the crushing realization that he'd finally found something his power couldn't control, his money couldn't buy, and his influence couldn't touch. Elena's determination to raise their child alone, safe from the shadow he cast. And the worst part was, he couldn't even say she was wrong. The penthouse felt emptier than usual when Dante finally returned home after midnight. He poured himself another drink, his third since leaving the alley, and stood at the windows overlooking the city, watching millions of lights flicker in the darkness below. Somewhere out there, Elena was finishing her shift, probably exhausted, probably in pain from standing for hours while 8 months pregnant, with his child. The thought still felt surreal, like something happening to someone else. Dante had never particularly imagined himself as a father. He'd married Elena with some vague notion that children would eventually happen, but it had always been theoretical, something for a future that never quite arrived because there was always another deal to close, another threat to neutralize. Now the future had arrived without asking his permission. His phone rang. Vincent's name appeared on the screen. "It's late," Dante said by way of greeting. "I know, but Luca called me. Said there was some kind of situation at the restaurant tonight." Vincent paused. "Want to tell me what's going on?" Dante took a long drink, feeling the whiskey burn. "Elena's pregnant." Silence on the other end. Then, "I'm sorry, what?" "My ex-wife, who's been working as a waitress at Osteria Lucano for the past 3 months. She's 8 months pregnant with my child." Dante heard the bitterness in his own voice and didn't try to hide it. "And she never planned to tell me." Jesus. Vincent exhaled slowly. "Dante, how do you even know it's yours?" "The timing, the way she looked at me, the fact that she didn't bother denying it." Dante set his glass down harder than necessary. "It's mine, Vincent." Another pause. "Okay, what are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What could he do when the mother of his child had made it abundantly clear she wanted nothing from him except absence? "I don't know," Dante admitted, and the words felt like defeat. "She won't take money, won't accept protection. She's convinced the child is better off without me in the picture." "And is she right?" The question hit like a punch to the gut. "Excuse me?" "I'm not trying to be cruel," Vincent said carefully. "But think about it. Our world, your world specifically, isn't exactly child-friendly. How many enemies do you have who'd love to get leverage on you through a kid? How many times have we dealt with families being used as pressure points? I'm aware of the risks, Dante said coldly. Then you understand why she's scared. Elena's not stupid. She knows what being connected to you means. Vincent's voice softened slightly. Look, I'm not saying she's right to cut you out completely, but I understand why she's trying to keep the baby off the radar. Dante wanted to argue, wanted to insist that he could protect them both, that his power was specifically designed to keep threats at bay. But he'd seen too many operators lose control when family became involved. Sentiment made people vulnerable. Love made them weak. And Elena knew that better than anyone. I need to think, Dante said finally. I'll call you tomorrow. He hung up before Vincent could respond, then stood in the silent penthouse, trying to figure out how to navigate a situation where none of his usual tools applied. The days that followed were some of the strangest of Dante's life. He went through the motions, meetings, negotiations, the endless machinery of maintaining an empire. But his mind was elsewhere, circling obsessively around the problem of Elena like a shark around prey it couldn't quite reach. He had Vincent quietly investigate her situation. The report came back 2 days later, and it made Dante's blood boil. Elena was living in a studio apartment in Astoria, barely 500 square feet, in a building that had seen better days sometime in the 1970s. She was working 4 shifts a week at Osteria Lucano, despite being in her 3rd trimester, walking 40 minutes each way because she couldn't afford the subway fare and the building's unreliable heat. Her bank account showed less than $3,000, barely enough to cover a month's expenses, let alone what she'd need for the baby. She wasn't receiving any support from her family. Gianna had apparently offered, but Elena had refused, maintaining the same stubborn independence that had made her cut herself off from Dante's resources. She was drowning, and she was doing it deliberately, refusing every life preserver because they all came from sources she didn't trust. This is insane, Dante said, throwing the report on his desk. She's going to end up in the hospital from exhaustion, or worse. Vincent, sitting across from him, looked troubled. What do you want to do? You can't force her to accept help. Can't I? Dante leaned back in his chair, his mind already working through possibilities. I could buy her building, make repairs, improve the heat, reduce her rent without her knowing it came from me. She'd figure it out eventually. I could pay Luca to give her lighter duties, reduce her hours while maintaining her salary. Also obvious. Vincent studied him with something like concern. Dante, you can't solve this problem the way you solve business problems. You can't manipulate your way into her life. Then what do you suggest? Dante demanded. I just sit here and do nothing while she struggles? Maybe that's exactly what you do. Vincent's expression was unusually serious. Maybe you respect her choice, even if you disagree with it. The suggestion felt impossible. Dante Moretti didn't stand by and watch situations deteriorate when he had the power to intervene. But this wasn't a business negotiation or a territorial dispute. This was Elena, who'd already proven she couldn't be leveraged or controlled. He was still wrestling with the problem when Celine arrived at his office that evening, dressed in a deep blue dress that probably cost more than Elena made in a month. She'd come by to finalize details for an upcoming gallery opening she was attending as his companion. You seem distracted, she observed, settling into one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Just work. Right. Celine crossed her legs, studying him with those perceptive green eyes. You've been just work for 2 weeks now. Canceling dinners, missing events. Marcus mentioned you skipped the Whitmore fundraiser last week. Something came up. Dante. Celine's voice was patient but firm. I'm not an idiot. Something's wrong. You don't have to tell me what, but don't insult my intelligence by pretending everything's fine. He looked at her. This woman who asked so little of him, who played her role perfectly without demanding anything beyond the agreed-upon terms. She deserved better than his distraction. My ex-wife is pregnant, he said bluntly. The baby's mine. She wants nothing to do with me. Selena's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. I see. Does that change things for you? She considered the question seriously. Does it change things for you? I don't know yet. Dante rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. She's made her position clear, but it's my child, Celine. I can't just pretend that doesn't matter. No, Celine agreed quietly. You can't. She stood, smoothing her dress. I think we should cancel Friday's event. You don't need to. Yes, I do. She picked up her clutch, her expression unreadable. Dante, I accepted this arrangement because it was simple, uncomplicated. You needed a companion for social events, and I needed access to a world I couldn't enter on my own. But if there's a child involved, if there's still something between you and your ex-wife, then this stops being simple. There's nothing between us, Dante said. She made that abundantly clear. Celine smiled sadly. The fact that you've been obsessing over her for 2 weeks suggests otherwise. She moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope you figure out what you actually want. Not what's strategic or what maintains your control, but what you genuinely want. Because I don't think you've asked yourself that question in a very long time. After she left, Dante sat alone in his office, staring at the report on Elena's living situation, Celine's words echoing in his mind. What did he want? The question felt almost foreign. Dante had spent so long focused on building and maintaining power that personal desires had become irrelevant. He wanted control. He wanted security. He wanted his empire to run smoothly and his enemies to stay neutralized. But what did he want with Elena? With the child? The honest answer terrified him. He wanted them safe. He wanted them protected. He wanted to know that his son or daughter would grow up without fear, without struggling, without having to walk 40 minutes in the winter cold because their mother couldn't afford transportation. And he wanted Elena to look at him without that bone-deep weariness in her eyes, without the conviction that he was fundamentally dangerous to her peace. But wanting something didn't mean he could have it. That was a lesson Dante had learned young, watching his own father choose power over family again and again until there was no family left to choose. 3 weeks crawled by with agonizing slowness. Dante maintained his distance, respecting Elena's boundary even as it killed him, but he couldn't stop himself from certain precautions. He had Vincent assign a security detail, 2 of his most discreet operatives, to watch Elena's building and her route to work. Not to interfere, just to observe, to make sure she got home safely, to ensure that if any threat emerged, Dante would know about it immediately. He paid Luca a quiet visit and made it clear that Elena's shifts should be adjusted to reduce strain without making it obvious. Fewer hours, more breaks, lighter sections of the restaurant. Make it look natural, Dante instructed. If she suspects I'm involved, she'll quit. Luca nodded nervously. She's a good worker, Mr. Moretti. Never complains, always on time. She doesn't deserve— I know what she deserves, Dante interrupted sharply. Then, softer, just take care of her, please. He hated how that last word sounded, like begging. But pride mattered less than keeping Elena safe, even if she never knew he was the one protecting her. The call came on a Thursday night in late December. Dante was in a meeting with the Castellane family, discussing expansion into Jersey territories, when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He normally would have ignored it, but something made him glance at the screen. The area code was local. He stepped out of the meeting, Vincent shooting him a questioning look. Moretti, he answered. Mr. Moretti, this is Dr. Sarah Chen from Lenox Hill Hospital. The woman's voice was professional but urgent. I'm calling about Elena Rossi. You're listed as her emergency contact. Dante's world narrowed to a single point. What happened? She came in about an hour ago with signs of preterm labor. We've got her stabilized for now, but the baby's in distress. She's asking for you. The words didn't compute. Elena, who'd spent months making it clear she wanted nothing from him, was asking for him? I'm on my way, Dante said, already moving toward the elevator. Tell her I'm coming. He made the 20-minute drive to the hospital in 12, Vincent beside him, both of them silent. Dante's mind raced through worst-case scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. Preterm labor at 8 months wasn't ideal, but it wasn't catastrophic either, unless there were complications. Unless the distress Dr. Chen mentioned was serious. Unless he was about to lose both of them before he'd ever really had them. The emergency entrance was chaos. Ambulances, crying patients, harried staff moving between rooms with practiced urgency. Dante cut through it all like a knife, his presence parting crowds by sheer force of will. A nurse tried to stop him at the maternity ward entrance. Sir, you can't just— Elena Rossi, Dante said. his voice carrying enough authority that the nurse stepped back instinctively. Where is she? Room 347, but Dante was already moving, Vincent trailing behind. They found the room at the end of a long corridor, its door partially open. Through it, Dante could hear the beeping of monitors and Elena's voice, strained with pain. He pushed through the door and stopped short. Elena lay in the hospital bed, pale and sweating, an IV in her arm, and a fetal monitor strapped to her stomach. Dr. Chen stood beside her, checking the readouts while a nurse adjusted the IV drip. But what made Dante freeze was the look on Elena's face when she saw him. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. Dante, she breathed, and her voice cracked on his name. He crossed to her bedside in 3 long strides, his hand finding hers without conscious thought. Her fingers gripped his with surprising strength. I'm here, he said, and was shocked by how rough his voice sounded. I'm right here. Mr. Moretti? Dr. Chen said, her expression serious. Elena's having contractions, but they're irregular and the baby's heart rate keeps dropping. We need to do an emergency C-section. The words hit like bullets. Are they? The baby's in distress, Dr. Chen said bluntly. Every minute we wait increases the risk. We need your consent to proceed. Dante looked at Elena, who was staring at him with eyes full of fear and something else he couldn't quite identify. Elena? I'm scared, she whispered. I didn't know who else to call. The admission broke something in him. All her pride, all her determination to handle this alone, and in the moment of real crisis, she'd called him. Not her sister, not her friends. Him. Do the surgery, Dante said to Dr. Chen, not taking his eyes off Elena. Whatever she needs, whatever keeps them both safe. We'll need you to wait in the family room, the doctor said. We're prepping her now. No. Elena's hand tightened on his. I want him here. Please. Dr. Chen hesitated, clearly weighing protocols against the patient's distress. Mr. Moretti, you'll need to scrub in. The nurse will show you where. You have 5 minutes. The next hour was the longest of Dante's life. He stood beside Elena's bed, gowned and masked, holding her hand while the surgical team worked with terrifying efficiency. They'd given her an epidural. She was awake but numb from the chest down, able to feel pressure but no pain. Still, Dante watched her face contort with fear every time a monitor beeped or the surgical team exchanged urgent murmurs. Talk to me, Elena said suddenly, her voice tight. Please, I can't just lie here and think about what's happening. Dante had no idea what to say. Small talk felt absurd. Apologies felt insufficient. But she needed something from him, and he'd spent 3 months doing nothing. He couldn't fail her now. Do you remember the first time we met? He asked quietly. Elena's eyes found his above the surgical drape. The Castellane gallery opening. You were standing in front of that Rothko painting, and I came up with some pretentious comment about color theory. Dante felt a ghost of a smile beneath his mask. You looked at me like I was the most insufferable person you'd ever encountered. You were insufferable, Elena said, and some of the tension in her voice eased slightly. You spent 10 minutes trying to impress me with your knowledge of abstract expressionism. It worked, though. It did not. You asked for my number, and I turned you down. But you gave me your card. Museum curator. Very official. I felt bad, Elena admitted. You looked so confident, like you'd never been rejected in your life. I thought it would be character building. Despite everything, the surgery, the fear, the months of distance between them, Dante laughed. Quiet and rough, but genuine. It was. I had to show up at the museum 3 times before you agreed to have coffee with me. You were persistent. I wanted you. The words came out before he could stop them, raw and honest in a way Dante usually avoided. From that first moment, I wanted you, not just because you were beautiful, but because you looked at me and saw through all the performance. You weren't impressed by the money or the power. You just saw me. Elena's eyes filled with tears. That was the problem, though. I saw you, the real you, and I loved him. But the real you came with all that other stuff, the empire, the danger, the choices I couldn't live with. The surgical team was working behind the drape, their movements efficient and practiced. Dante could hear the sound of instruments on metal trays, quiet instructions being passed between nurses. Any minute now, his child would be born. I know I wasn't what you needed, Dante said quietly. I know I prioritized the wrong things. But Elena, I need you to know, I never stopped caring about you. Even when we were falling apart, even when you walked away, I never stopped. Mr. Moretti, doctor, Chen's voice cut through the moment. We have the baby. Time seemed to suspend. Dante heard a sound, a weak, wavering cry, and felt his entire world tilt on its axis. It's a boy, the doctor announced. Small, but he's breathing on his own. That's a good sign. A boy. He had a son. Elena was crying openly now, straining to see over the drape. Is he okay? Please, is he... The pediatric team is checking him now, Dr. Chen said. He came out fighting, which is what we want to see. A nurse appeared at Dante's shoulder, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blue. Would you like to cut the cord, Dad? Dad? The word hit him like a physical force. Dante looked down at the baby, his son, and felt something crack wide open in his chest. The baby was smaller than he'd expected, his skin still red and wrinkled, his tiny fists waving in protest at being removed from the only world he'd known. But he was perfect. Go, Elena whispered. Please go with him. Make sure he's okay. Dante didn't want to leave her side, but the nurse was already moving toward the warmer where the pediatric team waited. He followed, his legs feeling strangely unsteady, and watched as they worked on his son with practiced efficiency, clearing airways, checking vitals, performing the dozens of small assessments that would determine if this tiny human was truly stable. Good color, one of the doctors murmured. Heart rate is strong, respiratory effort is adequate for gestational age. What does that mean? Dante demanded. Is he okay or not? The pediatrician looked up, her expression softening. He's small, 5 pounds, 2 ounces, but that's not unusual for 37 weeks. No obvious complications. We'll want to monitor him closely for the next 24 hours, but right now he's doing everything we'd hoped for. Relief hit Dante so hard his knees nearly buckled. Can his mother see him? In just a minute. We need to finish the assessment. But the nurse was already wrapping the baby more securely, creating a tiny burrito of blankets and newborn. She placed him carefully in Dante's arms, adjusting his hold until it was secure. Support the head, she instructed. Just like that. Perfect. Dante looked down at his son and felt the last of his carefully maintained control shatter completely. This tiny person, barely bigger than a football, was half him, half Elena. A combination of their DNA, their history, their complicated love. And he was real, not theoretical, not someday. Here, now. Depending on them both to figure out how to be parents when they couldn't even figure out how to be in the same room without tension. Dante? Elena's voice, weak but insistent, pulled him back to the present. Is he okay? He carried the baby to her side, the surgical team still working to close the incision, but Dr. Chen nodding approval. Elena's arms were still strapped down, so Dante held the baby where she could see him, lowering him carefully until his tiny face was inches from hers. He's perfect, Dante said, his voice breaking on the words. Elena, he's perfect. She was sobbing now, trying to touch the baby but unable to move her arms. I can't. I need to hold him. Soon, Dr. Chen said gently. Let us finish here, and then you'll have all the time in the world. But Elena wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on the baby, drinking in every detail of his face with the kind of desperate intensity that only a mother separated from her newborn could understand. Does he have all his fingers and toes? 10 of each, the pediatrician confirmed from across the room. Perfect in every way. What's his name? The nurse asked, preparing paperwork. Elena's eyes found Dante's, and in them he saw a question, a choice being offered. After months of shutting him out, of making it clear she needed nothing from him, she was giving him this moment, this decision. I don't know, Dante said honestly. We never discussed it. Luca, Elena whispered. I was thinking Luca, after my grandfather. Luca. It was a good name, a strong name, and the fact that she'd chosen it without consulting him was just another reminder of how separate their lives had become. Luca Moretti, Dante said, testing the sound of it. Then seeing Elena's expression tighten, Or Luca Rossi, whatever you want. Moretti, Elena said quietly, and Dante's heart nearly stopped. He's your son too. He should have your name. The words felt like forgiveness, though Dante knew better than to assume they meant everything was fixed. But standing there, holding his newborn son while Elena recovered from surgery, Dante felt something shift in the careful calculations that governed his life. None of it mattered. The empire, the power, the carefully maintained control, all of it paled in comparison to this tiny human who'd just entered the world fighting. He'd built an empire to protect himself from vulnerability. But looking at his son, Dante realized that true vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was this: loving something so much that losing it would destroy you. And he was already in too deep to protect himself anymore. The recovery room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and Elena's soft breathing. They'd moved her here an hour ago, once the surgical team had confirmed everything was stable. Luca, their son, Dante's mind still stumbled over the reality of it, was in the NICU for observation, standard procedure for babies born even slightly premature. Dante sat in the chair beside Elena's bed, watching her sleep. The anesthesia had worn off, but exhaustion had claimed her the moment the doctors assured her Luca was safe. Her face looked younger in sleep, the worry lines smoothed away, one hand curled against the pillow like a child's. He should leave. Let her rest without his presence complicating everything. But every time he moved to stand, something kept him rooted to the chair. Maybe it was the memory of her hand gripping his during the surgery. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at him when she said their son should have his name. Or maybe it was just that, for the first time in months, he didn't feel like he was standing on the outside of something vital, looking in through glass he couldn't break. "You're still here." Elena's voice was rough from sleep and intubation. Dante leaned forward, reaching for the water cup on her bedside table. "You should drink something," he said, offering her the straw. She took a few careful sips, wincing slightly as she shifted position. "How long was I asleep?" "About an hour. The nurses checked on Luca 15 minutes ago. He's stable. Oxygen levels are good." Relief washed over her face. "I want to see him." "They said you can as soon as you're able to move. The NICU is just down the hall." Dante hesitated. "Elena, about what you said before, about him having my name, you don't have to—" "I meant it." She met his eyes, her expression difficult to read. "He's yours, Dante. I can't change that, and I shouldn't try to erase it. Whatever else is broken between us, he deserves to know where he came from." The words should have felt like victory, but they tasted like ash. "Is that all I am to him? A name on a birth certificate?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting to the window where winter sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds. "I don't know yet. I thought I had it all figured out. How to do this alone, how to protect him from everything complicated about your world. But then the contraction started, and I was so scared, and the only person I wanted was you." "Why?" The question came out rougher than he intended. "You spent months making it clear you didn't need me. Because despite everything, despite all the reasons I had to walk away, you're still the person I trust when it matters most." Her voice cracked slightly. "And I hate that. I hate that after everything, after convincing myself I could do this alone, the moment things got real, I fell back on you." Dante felt something twist in his chest. "That's not weakness, Elena." "Isn't it?" She finally looked at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I built this whole narrative about being independent, about not needing you or your money or your protection. But here you are, and here I am, and our son is in the NICU, and I'm terrified of what happens next." "What do you want to happen next?" The question hung between them, weighted with months of silence and hurt. Elena's hand moved to her stomach, an instinctive gesture, even though the baby was no longer there. "I want him to be safe," she said finally. "I want him to grow up without fear, without having to look over his shoulder, without becoming collateral damage in someone else's war." "That's not an answer to my question." "Yes, it is." Elena's voice firmed slightly. "Because everything else, what I want, what you want, what we might have been, all of it comes second to keeping him safe. You taught me that, actually. When we were married, I watched you make impossible choices, sacrificing everything personal for the sake of protecting your empire. Now I'm doing the same thing, just for a different empire." The parallel struck Dante like a physical blow. She was right. He'd spent years prioritizing his organization over their relationship, making decisions that protected his power base at the expense of his marriage. And now Elena was doing exactly the same thing, choosing their son's safety over any chance of reconciliation. He couldn't even be angry about it. It was his own playbook being used against him. "What if I could make it safe?" Dante asked quietly. "What if I could build something that didn't require him to be invisible?" Elena's laugh was bitter. "You can't, Dante. Your whole world is built on violence and fear. You might control it. You might manage it brilliantly, but you can't eliminate it. There will always be someone trying to take what you have. Always another threat. Always another war. Then let me protect you both, properly." He leaned forward, needing her to understand. "Not from a distance. Not through third parties and indirect interference. Let me actually be present." "As what? A father who shows up between meetings? A weekend visitor when business allows?" Elena shook her head. "I meant what I said in that alley. Children need consistency. They need someone who's there every day, not just when it's convenient. So I should just walk away? Accept that I get nothing except financial responsibility?" "I didn't say that." Elena's expression softened slightly, and for a moment Dante saw a glimpse of the woman he'd married. "I'm saying that if you want to be part of his life, it has to be real. Not performative, not when it fits your schedule. Real presence, real commitment, even when it's inconvenient or messy or interferes with your perfectly controlled empire." "You don't think I can do that?" "I don't know if you can." She met his gaze steadily. "I've never seen you choose anything over your work, Dante. Not once in 7 years. Why would Luca be different?" "Because he already is," Dante wanted to say. Because holding that tiny body in the delivery room had rearranged something fundamental in his understanding of what mattered. But words were cheap, and Elena had heard too many promises broken by necessity and empire building. A nurse appeared in the doorway, smiling warmly. "Mrs. Moretti, if you're feeling up to it, we can take you to see your son now." "Rossi," Elena corrected automatically, but she was already trying to sit up, wincing at the pain from her incision. "Yes, please. I need to see him." Dante stood immediately, offering his arm for support. Elena hesitated only a second before accepting it, letting him help her into the wheelchair the nurse had brought. The short trip down the hall to the NICU felt endless, Elena's hands gripping the armrests with white-knuckled intensity. The NICU was a forest of incubators and monitors, each one containing a tiny human fighting for stability. Luca's isolette was in the corner, labeled with a card that read, "Baby Boy Moretti." A nurse was checking his vitals, her movements gentle and practiced. "He's been awake," the nurse said, smiling at Elena. "Fussy, actually. Good lungs on this one." Elena's breath caught. "Can I hold him?" "Absolutely. Let me get you settled." They transferred Elena to a rocking chair, explaining proper positioning to support the incision site. Then the nurse lifted Luca from the isolette, placing him carefully in Elena's arms. The transformation on Elena's face was instant and absolute. Every wall she'd built, every defense she'd maintained, crumbled in the face of her son. She looked down at him with an expression of such pure, overwhelming love that Dante felt like an intruder witnessing something too intimate for outside eyes. "Hi, baby," Elena whispered, her voice breaking. "Hi, my beautiful boy. I'm your mama." Luca made a small sound, somewhere between a cry and a coo, his tiny face scrunching up in protest at being awake. Elena laughed through her tears, adjusting him slightly, learning the weight and feel of him. Dante stood to the side, watching, and felt the full weight of what he'd almost lost crash over him. If Elena hadn't called him, if she'd maintained her stubborn independence through the delivery, he wouldn't be here. He would have missed this moment, this crystallization of everything that mattered. "Do you want to hold him?" Elena asked quietly, and Dante realized she was looking at him. "I don't want to interrupt." "You're his father," Elena said, and something in her tone had shifted. Not warmth exactly, but acknowledgement, recognition. "Come here." Dante crossed to them, his movements careful, and Elena showed him how to support Luca's head and body. The transfer was awkward, both of them navigating around her surgical site and his inexperience. But then Luca was in his arms again, and nothing else mattered. His son looked even smaller than Dante remembered from the delivery room. Fragile, vulnerable, completely dependent on the adults around him to keep him safe. The weight of that responsibility settled on Dante's shoulders like a physical thing. "He has your nose," Elena observed, her voice soft. Dante studied the tiny face, trying to see it. "You think?" "And my stubbornness, apparently. He's been fighting the nurses every time they try to check his temperature." There was pride in her voice, mixed with exhaustion. They sat like that for a long time, passing Luca back and forth, learning the language of his cries and the weight of his small body. The nurse came and went, checking vitals and offering guidance, but mostly leaving them alone in their small bubble of new parenthood. It was Elena who finally broke the spell. "We need to talk about the practical things," she said, her tone shifting back to business. "Living arrangements. Support. How this is actually going to work." Dante felt the walls going back up, brick by brick. "Okay. I can't go back to my apartment, not with a newborn and a C-section recovery." Elena kept her eyes on Luca, not looking at Dante. "Gianna offered me her spare room, but she's in Brooklyn and I don't want to impose—" "Stay with me." The words were out before Dante could think them through. Elena's head snapped up, her expression shocked. "What?" "The penthouse has 3 bedrooms. You can have the master suite. It has an attached bathroom, which will be easier with the recovery. I'll take one of the guest rooms. There's space for Luca's things, and I can hire a nurse to help during the day while you heal." "Dante, I can't." "It's not permanent," he continued, needing to get this out before she shut him down completely. "Just until you're recovered enough to manage on your own. 6 weeks, maybe 8. No strings attached. Separate bedrooms, separate lives. Just a practical solution to a practical problem." Elena stared at him like he'd suggested they fly to the moon. "You want me to move into your penthouse? With our newborn son, after spending months trying to stay as far away from you as possible?" "I want my son to have a safe place to come home from the hospital," Dante said, keeping his voice level. "I want you to be able to recover without worrying about stairs or money or whether you can afford a nurse. That's all. No ulterior motives." "Everything with you has ulterior motives." The accusation stung because it was usually true, but not this time. This time Dante was operating on pure instinct, no strategy, no manipulation, just the desperate need to keep them close enough to protect. "You're right," he admitted. "Usually yes, but Elena, I'm asking you to trust me, just for 6 weeks, to do the right thing. No games, no pressure, just help when you need it most." She wanted to say no. He could see it in every line of her body, the instinctive rejection of anything that came from him. But she was also exhausted and in pain and facing the reality of caring for a newborn alone while recovering from major surgery. Practicality warred with pride on her face. "Separate bedrooms," she said finally. "Separate lives. This isn't us getting back together." "I understand. And the moment I'm recovered enough to manage alone, I'm leaving." "Agreed." "I mean it, Dante. This changes nothing between us." But even as she said it, they both knew it was a lie. Everything had already changed the moment Luca was born. They just hadn't figured out what it meant yet. 2 days later, Dante's driver pulled up in front of the penthouse with Elena and Luca in the back seat. The discharge from the hospital had taken hours. Paperwork, final checks, instructions from 3 different nurses about caring for a newborn and managing surgical recovery. Elena had listened with fierce attention, taking notes on her phone, asking questions until she was satisfied she understood everything. Dante had arranged for a nurse, Mrs. Patricia Walsh, to meet them at the penthouse. She was in her late 50s, with 30 years of experience in postpartum and newborn care, and came highly recommended by Marcus's wife. She'd already set up the nursery in what had been Dante's home office, transforming it into a space that looked nothing like the sterile perfection of the rest of the penthouse. "This is Patricia," Dante said, making introductions in the foyer. "She'll be here during the day to help with Luca and make sure you're following the recovery protocols." Elena shook Patricia's hand, her expression wary. "I appreciate the help, but I need to be able to care for my own son." Of course, dear," Patricia said warmly, her Irish accent softening the words. "I'm here to assist, not take over. Though I will insist you rest when you need to, even if you insist you're fine. New mothers are terrible at taking care of themselves." Despite herself, Elena smiled slightly. I'll try to be a good patient. That's all I ask. Now, let's get you settled. Mister Moretti, would you bring the baby? Dante carefully lifted Luca's car seat, following the women deeper into the penthouse. The master suite had been prepared with fresh linens and the kind of medical supplies Elena would need for recovery. Patricia had also stocked it with basics for round-the-clock newborn care. Diapers, wipes, a changing station, everything within easy reach. I took the liberty of ordering some essentials, Patricia explained, showing Elena the setup. But you'll want to add your own touches, make it feel more comfortable. For now, though, you should rest. That was a long car ride, and I can see you're in pain. I'm fine, Elena said automatically, then winced as she tried to sit on the bed. You're not fine, and that's perfectly normal 2 days post-surgery. Patricia's tone was kind but firm. Let me help you get comfortable, then I'll show you how to manage feeding while protecting your incision. Dante stepped back, recognizing when his presence was superfluous. I'll be in my office if you need anything. But as he turned to leave, Elena's voice stopped him. Dante? Thank you. For this. I know I'm difficult about accepting help, but thank you. The words were quiet, almost grudging, but they hit him harder than any declaration could have. You don't need to thank me for taking care of my family. He left before she could correct him, remind him that they weren't actually a family, just 3 people temporarily sharing space out of necessity. The first week was harder than Dante had anticipated, not because Elena was difficult. If anything, she was almost painfully polite, treating him like a helpful stranger rather than the father of her child. But the proximity, the constant awareness of her presence just down the hall, the sound of Luca crying in the middle of the night, it was all a sharp reminder of what his life had been missing. Dante tried to maintain his normal schedule, meetings, negotiations, the endless machinery of the empire, but he found himself cutting things short, making excuses to get home earlier, drawn by the pull of something he couldn't quite name. Vincent noticed immediately. You left the Castellan meeting 40 minutes early, he said, appearing in Dante's office 3 days after Elena had moved in. Marco was confused. You never leave meetings early. I had somewhere to be. Right. And that somewhere was your penthouse, where your ex-wife and newborn son are currently living. Vincent settled into a chair, studying Dante with knowing eyes. You're different. I'm tired. Newborns don't sleep, in case you weren't aware. You're not sleeping in the nursery. The walls are thin. I can hear when he cries. Dante shuffled papers on his desk, avoiding Vincent's gaze. Patricia usually handles it, but sometimes Elena needs help. Someone has to be there. Someone being you. He's my son. And she's your ex-wife who explicitly told you this arrangement changes nothing. Vincent leaned forward. Dante, I'm saying this as your friend, not your lieutenant. Be careful. You're getting attached to something that has an expiration date. In 4 weeks, Elena's going to be recovered enough to leave. And when she does, you're going to be right back where you started. Except now you'll have tasted what you're missing. Dante wanted to argue, wanted to insist he had everything under control, but Vincent knew him too well to accept lies. What am I supposed to do? Dante asked finally. Ignore them? Maintain distance while they're living under my roof? I'm saying protect yourself. Because Elena's made her position clear, and hope is a dangerous thing in your line of work. After Vincent left, Dante sat in his office, staring at the wall where a Rothko painting hung, the same artist Elena had been studying the night they met. He'd bought it after the divorce, telling himself it was just a good investment, but he knew the truth. Every time he looked at it, he thought of her standing in that gallery, unimpressed by his pretentious commentary, seeing through him with those dark, knowing eyes. Vincent was right. Hope was dangerous, and Dante was already drowning in it. That night, Dante came home to find Elena in the kitchen, moving slowly but deliberately as she heated a bottle. She was wearing simple cotton pajamas, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, no makeup, nothing to hide behind. She looked exhausted and beautiful, and so far out of his reach it physically hurt. You're supposed to be resting, Dante said from the doorway. Elena jumped, nearly dropping the bottle. You're home early. It's 11. That's not early. For you it is. Usually you don't get in until 1 or 2. She tested the milk temperature on her wrist, a gesture Dante had watched Patricia demonstrate days ago. I couldn't sleep. Luca's been fussy all evening. Patricia thinks he might have gas. Where's Patricia? I sent her home. She was exhausted, and I can handle one night alone. Elena glanced at him. I did it before you, remember? Dante crossed to the cabinet, pulling down a glass for water. For exactly 3 days, while recovering from surgery and working full-time. Not exactly a sustainable model. I would have figured it out. Would you? Or would you have ended up back in the hospital from exhaustion and infection? The sharp edge in his voice made Elena's head snap up. What's that supposed to mean? It means you're so determined to prove you don't need help that you'd rather suffer than accept it. Dante set the glass down harder than necessary. You were living in a studio apartment with no heat, working 40 hours a week at 8 months pregnant, walking miles every day because you couldn't afford transportation. That's not strength, Elena. That's self-destruction. How do you... She stopped, realization dawning on her face. You had someone watching me. Dante didn't deny it. After I saw you at the restaurant, I needed to know you were safe. You had no right. I had every right. That was my child you were carrying, and you were putting both of you at risk. Dante's control was slipping, months of frustration bleeding through. What was I supposed to do? Just trust that you had everything handled while you slowly worked yourself to death? Yes! Elena's voice rose, then immediately dropped as Luca's cry came from the nursery. She closed her eyes, taking a breath. Yes, Dante. You were supposed to trust that I could take care of myself. That I didn't need you or your security detail or your manipulation. Keeping you safe isn't manipulation. It is when I explicitly asked you not to interfere. She picked up the bottle, moving toward the nursery. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You can't help yourself. You see a problem and you have to control it, fix it, manage it, even when the problem is me making my own choices. Dante followed her down the hall, his frustration mounting. Your choices were going to get you hurt. My choices were mine to make. Elena pushed open the nursery door, crossing to where Luca was wailing in his bassinet. She lifted him carefully, supporting her incision, and settled into the rocking chair. You don't get it, do you? It's not about whether your way is safer or smarter or more efficient. It's about respecting that I'm an adult capable of making decisions about my own life. Even when those decisions are wrong? Elena looked at him, Luca now quiet and feeding in her arms, and her expression was infinitely sad. Especially then. Because they're mine, Dante. My mistakes. My consequences. My life. The words hit like bullets, each one finding its mark. Dante stood in the doorway of the nursery he'd created, watching Elena care for their son in the home he'd provided, and realized that none of it mattered. He could give her every material thing, every comfort and security, but he couldn't give her what she actually wanted. The freedom to fail on her own terms. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For overstepping. For having you watched. For all of it. Elena's expression softened slightly. I know you thought you were helping, but Dante, if we're going to make this work, even just for the next few weeks, you have to let me do things my way, even when you disagree. And if your way puts you in danger, then I deal with the consequences, like an adult. She adjusted Luca, who was making soft sucking sounds, against the bottle. You can't protect me from everything. And honestly, I don't want you to. I spent 3 years of our marriage watching you try to control every variable, manage every risk. It was suffocating. The accusation stung because it was true. Dante had spent their entire marriage trying to create perfect conditions, eliminating threats before Elena even knew they existed, making decisions for both of them in the name of protection. And she'd left him because of it. What do you want from me then? Dante asked, genuine confusion bleeding through. You say you don't want my money or my protection or my interference, but you're here, in my home, letting me help. What am I supposed to be? Elena was quiet for a long time, looking down at Luca as he fed. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know. I'm still figuring that out. It wasn't an answer, not really, but it was more honesty than they'd shared in months, and Dante took it for what it was, a crack in the wall she'd built. Not an opening, not yet, but the possibility of one, if he could learn to be patient, if he could learn to let her make her own mistakes, if he could somehow become someone different than the man he'd spent 40 years perfecting. The question was whether that transformation was even possible. The transformation happened so gradually that Dante almost didn't notice it at first. Small changes, barely perceptible shifts in the architecture of his carefully ordered life. He started coming home before midnight, then before 11, then, shockingly, sometimes before 10. Vincent noticed. Of course Vincent noticed. The Volkov meeting, Vincent said, standing in Dante's office doorway at 8:30 on a Tuesday evening. You're leaving? It's handled. Boris knows the terms. He'll either accept them or he won't. Dante closed his laptop, reaching for his coat. Either way, we'll know by morning. You never leave negotiations before they're finalized. I'm leaving this one. Dante met Vincent's eyes, daring him to push it. Luca has his 2-week checkup tomorrow. I want to make sure Elena has everything she needs. Vincent's expression was unreadable. Patricia's there. Elena's capable. The baby's fine. I know.
Then why?
Because I want to be there, Dante said, the admission coming out sharper than intended. Is that a problem? Vincent held up his hands in surrender. No problem. Just an observation. He stepped aside, letting Dante pass. Be careful, Dante. You're building a life that has an expiration date. The words followed Dante all the way home, echoing in the silence of the car. Vincent was right. Elena had made it clear this arrangement was temporary, a practical solution to a practical problem. In a few weeks, she'd be healed enough to leave, and she would. Because that's what she'd said she'd do, and Elena always kept her word. But walking into the penthouse and hearing Luca's soft cries from the nursery, seeing the light spilling from under Elena's door, Dante couldn't bring himself to care about expiration dates. This moment was real. This moment was his. Tomorrow could take care of itself. He found Elena in the nursery, pacing slowly with Luca against her shoulder. She was singing something soft and off-key, a lullaby Dante didn't recognize. She looked up when he entered, surprise flickering across her face. You're home early. Finished sooner than expected. Dante set down his briefcase, loosening his tie. He won't sleep? He's fighting it. Patricia says it's normal at this age, but it feels like he'll never settle. Elena's voice carried the particular exhaustion of new motherhood, bone-deep and persistent. I've tried everything. Feeding, changing, rocking, singing. Nothing works. Let me try. Elena hesitated, that familiar wariness crossing her features. But then Luca let out another wail, and practicality won over pride. She transferred him carefully to Dante's arms, showing him the position she'd been using. Support his head, gentle pressure on his back, and keep moving. He likes the motion. Dante took his son, feeling the small body tense and angry against his chest. Luca's face was red with effort, his tiny fists waving in protest. Dante started walking, making slow circles around the nursery, humming low in his chest. It was something his own father had done, one of the few clear memories Dante had from early childhood. Not words, not a lullaby, just a deep rumbling hum that had vibrated through his small body and somehow meant safety. Gradually, Luca's cries softened, his fists uncurled, his breathing evened out into the deep, shuddering rhythm of sleep, finally claiming him. Dante looked up to find Elena watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. He never settles that fast for me, she said quietly. You've been holding him for hours. You're exhausted, and he can feel it. Dante continued his slow circuit of the room, not wanting to risk waking Luca by stopping. Patricia mentioned babies pick up on stress. So you read the parenting books she left? I read everything she left. Dante glanced down at his sleeping son. I don't know what I'm doing, Elena. I'm making it up as I go, but I'm trying. Something in Elena's expression shifted, softening in a way Dante hadn't seen since before the divorce. I can see that. They stood in the quiet nursery, the only sound Luca's soft breathing and the distant hum of the city beyond the windows. It felt almost normal, this moment, almost like they were a real family instead of two people navigating the aftermath of everything they'd broken. I should put him down, Dante said finally, moving toward the bassinet. Wait. Elena's hand touched his arm, stopping him. Can we talk? About the checkup tomorrow? What about it? I want you to come, if you can. She pulled her hand back, wrapping her arms around herself. The pediatrician will ask questions about family history, medical conditions, things I don't know about your side. Dante carefully lowered Luca into the bassinet, making sure he was settled before turning to face Elena. You want me at the appointment. I want our son to have complete medical information, Elena corrected. This isn't about us. It's about doing what's best for him. But her eyes told a different story. There was something tentative in her expression, a crack in the armor she'd maintained so carefully. An olive branch extended cautiously, ready to be pulled back at the first sign of danger. I'll be there, Dante said. What time? 10. At the pediatrician's office on East 72nd. Elena moved toward the door, then paused. Thank you for coming home early, for helping with Luca, for all of it. You don't need to thank me for being his father. Don't I? Elena's smile was sad. Most men in your position wouldn't bother. They'd throw money at the problem and consider their obligation met. But you're here, Dante. You keep showing up, even when I make it hard. She left before he could respond, her footsteps soft on the hardwood floor as she retreated to her room. Dante stood in the nursery, watching Luca sleep, and felt the weight of her words settle over him. He was showing up. But was it enough? Could presence alone repair the damage he'd done? The years of choosing empire over intimacy? Or was he just delaying the inevitable moment when Elena would decide she'd recovered enough to leave? The pediatrician's appointment the next morning was routine but revelatory. Dr. Sarah Kim was thorough, examining Luca with practiced efficiency while asking Elena and Dante questions about their medical histories. Any heart conditions in the family? Doctor, Kim asked, her stethoscope pressed to Luca's tiny chest. Dante hesitated. My father died of a heart attack at 58. Elena's head whipped toward him. I didn't know that. You never asked. The words came out harsher than Dante intended. We didn't exactly discuss family medical history during our marriage, because they'd been too busy not discussing anything that mattered. Surface conversations. Careful avoidance of topics that might lead to arguments about Dante's work or Elena's growing unhappiness. Dr. Kim made a note on her chart, apparently oblivious to the tension. We'll keep an eye on cardiovascular markers as he grows. Any history of diabetes, cancer, autoimmune disorders? The questions continued, painting a picture of two families Dante and Elena had never properly integrated. Her grandmother's arthritis, his uncle's asthma, little details that should have been shared years ago but never were because they'd been too busy pretending the marriage was working. He's healthy, Dr. Kim said finally, smiling at Luca, who was now screaming his protest at being poked and prodded. Weight gain is good. No concerns developmentally. You're doing an excellent job, both of you. Both of you. As if they were a unit, a team, partners in something beyond just biology. In the car afterward, Elena was quiet, staring out the window at the city sliding past. Luca slept in his car seat between them, exhausted from the appointment. Your father, Elena said finally. You never talked about him. There wasn't much to say. He was never around, and when he was usually angry about something. Dante kept his eyes on the road. He built an empire and died protecting it. Very dramatic, very pointless. Is that what you think you're doing? Building something pointless? I think I'm building something that takes everything and gives back very little. Dante glanced at her. You tried to tell me that during the marriage. I didn't listen. Elena was quiet for a moment. I didn't understand what I was asking you to give up. Your whole world, everything you'd built. I wanted you to just walk away from it like it didn't matter. That wasn't fair either. The admission surprised him. You're saying you were wrong? I'm saying we were both impossible. Elena's laugh was soft and bitter. You couldn't stop being who you were, and I couldn't stop resenting who you were. We were doomed from the start. Then why did you marry me? Because I loved you. She said it simply, like stating a fact. Because when you looked at me, I felt seen in a way I'd never experienced. Because you were brilliant and dangerous and complicated, and I thought I could be the person who understood you. You did understand me. That was the problem. Elena turned to look at him fully. What do you mean? You saw through everything, Dante said quietly. Every performance, every calculated move. You looked at me and saw the parts I kept hidden, the fear that I was becoming my father, the loneliness of being powerful. The way control was just another word for being terrified of vulnerability. Dante, you understood me, he continued, needing to finish this thought. And instead of using it against me like everyone else would, you tried to save me from myself. You kept asking me to choose you, to choose us, hoping that love would be enough to make me walk away from the thing that defined me. But it wasn't enough. No, it wasn't. Dante pulled up to the penthouse, cutting the engine. And I spent a year telling myself that meant you were the problem, that you didn't understand the realities of my world, that you were being unreasonable. But the truth is, you understood perfectly. You just knew I'd never choose differently. They sat in the car, Luca sleeping peacefully between them, while the weight of their history pressed down like physical force. "Why are you telling me this now?" Elena asked. "Because I want you to know I understand what I lost. Not just you, not just the marriage, but the chance to be someone different, someone worth staying for." Dante met her eyes. "I want you to know that even if I couldn't change then, I'm trying to change now. For Luca. For all of us." He reached across the car seat, his hand hovering near hers but not touching. "I know I don't deserve another chance. I know this arrangement has an expiration date. But Elena, I'm trying to figure out how to be someone who shows up, who's present, who doesn't let the empire consume everything." Elena looked at his hand, at the space between them that felt both infinite and infinitesimal. "I don't know if people really change, Dante. I want to believe they can, but I've seen too much evidence to the contrary." "Then let me prove it." He pulled his hand back, giving her space. "Not with words, not with promises, just with consistency, day after day, showing up when I say I will, being present even when it's inconvenient. And what happens when there's a crisis? When your empire needs you more than we do?" It was the question that mattered most, the one that had broken them the first time. Dante thought about his father, always chasing the next deal, the next threat, the next expansion. He thought about the emergency meetings that had pulled him away from anniversaries, the phone calls that had interrupted every dinner, the way work had slowly consumed every corner of his life until there was nothing left for Elena. "I don't know," he admitted. "I can't promise there won't be crises. But I can promise that you and Luca won't always come second. That has to count for something." Elena studied him for a long moment, and Dante felt the weight of her judgment. This was the woman who'd seen him at his worst, who knew exactly how many promises he'd broken in the name of necessity. "It counts for something," she said finally. "But Dante, I need more than effort. I need proof that when it matters, when the choice is between us and your empire, you'll choose us. And I don't know if you can do that. Let me try." "You are trying. I see that." Elena reached for the door handle. "But trying isn't the same as succeeding. And I won't put Luca through what I went through. The waiting, the disappointment, the slow realization that love isn't enough to compete with power." She got out of the car, moving to retrieve Luca from his car seat. Dante sat in the driver's seat, watching her navigate the logistics of motherhood with practiced grace, and felt the familiar frustration of a problem he couldn't solve through strategy or force. Vincent's words echoed again. "You're building a life that has an expiration date." Maybe he was. But for the first time in years, Dante found himself hoping that expiration dates could be negotiated. The crisis came 2 weeks later, exactly as Elena had predicted. Dante was in the nursery at 3 in the morning, walking Luca through another bout of sleeplessness when his phone exploded with alerts. Vincent's name flashed across the screen, followed by 3 other lieutenants. Emergency. Warehouse raid. Federal agents. Immediate response required. The word sent ice through Dante's veins. A federal raid meant someone had talked, or someone had been careless. Either way, it was a threat that could unravel years of carefully maintained operations. He looked down at Luca, finally drowsy in his arms, then at the phone still buzzing with increasingly urgent messages. This was it. The choice Elena had been waiting for him to fail. Dante carefully placed Luca in the bassinet, making sure he was settled. Then he picked up his phone and called Vincent. "How bad?" he asked, his voice low to avoid waking the baby. "Bad enough. They hit the warehouse in Red Hook. The clean one, thank Christ, but they're using it as justification for broader warrants. We need you down here to coordinate the response." "Can you handle it?" Silence on the other end. Then, "What?" "I asked if you can handle it. You know the protocols. You know who to call." Dante moved to the nursery window, looking out at the city that never slept. I'm asking if you can manage this without me. Dante, this is a federal investigation. You need to be here. And I will be, in the morning. But right now, I'm exactly where I need to be. Dante could hear his own words, could barely believe he was saying them. Handle the immediate crisis. I'll be at the office by 7 to coordinate next steps. Another pause. Are you serious? Completely. You're more than capable, Vincent. I trust you. Dante ended the call before Vincent could argue further, then silenced his phone and set it face down on the dresser. The action felt simultaneously liberating and terrifying. For the first time in his adult life, Dante Moretti had chosen to let someone else handle a crisis. Had chosen to stay home instead of running toward the fire. Had chosen his son over his empire. He returned to the bassinet, watching Luca sleep with that intense focus only newborns could achieve. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell with perfect rhythm, completely unaware that his father had just made a decision that might cost him everything. You're worth it, Dante whispered to his sleeping son. You and your mother, you're worth more than all of it. The door opened softly behind him. Elena stood in the doorway, wrapped in a robe, her hair messy from sleep. I heard your phone, she said quietly. Everything okay? Dante could lie. Could tell her it was nothing, handle it tomorrow, no big deal. But she'd know. She always knew. There's a situation, federal raid on one of my properties. He kept his voice calm, factual. Vincent's handling it. Elena's eyes widened slightly. Vincent's handling it, not you? Not tonight. Dante turned back to Luca. Tonight I'm here, where I should be. He heard Elena's sharp intake of breath, felt the weight of her gaze on his back. She moved closer, standing beside him at the bassinet. That's a big deal, she said carefully. That kind of situation, you'd never delegate it before. I know. Dante, if this is some kind of test, some way to prove it's not. He finally looked at her, letting her see the truth in his eyes. It's me choosing differently. You asked if I could put you and Luca first when it mattered. This matters. And you matter more. Elena's hand came to her mouth, her eyes suddenly bright with tears. You're going to regret this. In the morning, when you see what Vincent had to handle without you, you're going to resent me for being the reason you weren't there. No, I won't. You don't know that. I do. Dante reached for her hand, giving her the choice to take it or pull away. After a heartbeat, her fingers wrapped around his. Because I've spent 40 years putting the empire first. And what did it get me? Money, power, fear, respect maybe. But Elena, I've been alone. Completely, fundamentally alone. And I'm tired of it. So this is about not being lonely? She tried to pull her hand back, but he held on gently. This is about finally understanding what matters. Not in theory, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived truth. He gestured to Luca with his free hand. That's my son. He's 2 weeks old, and he's already changed everything. And you're the mother of my child, yes. But you're also the only person who ever looked at me and saw something worth saving, even when I didn't deserve it. Elena was crying openly now, silent tears tracking down her face. I can't do this again, Dante. I can't let myself believe you've changed and then watch you slip back into old patterns. It would break me. Then don't believe me. Watch me. He squeezed her hand gently. Not for a day or a week. Watch me for months. Watch me show up consistently, make different choices, be present even when it costs me, and then decide if I've changed. And if you fail, if there's another crisis and you choose the empire, then you were right about me, and I'll accept whatever consequences come from that. Dante pulled her slightly closer, not into an embrace, but into proximity. But, Elena, I need you to know, I want to be someone different, someone worthy of you and Luca. I'm just not sure I know how yet. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for deception or manipulation. Dante let her look, keeping his expression open, showing her the vulnerability he usually kept locked away. Okay, she said finally. Okay? I'll watch, I'll wait, I'll see if you mean it. Elena's voice was still cautious, still guarded, but there was something new underneath, something that looked almost like hope. But Dante, you need to understand, I'm protecting Luca first. If I see any sign that your world is bleeding into his, that he's at risk because of who you are, I'm gone. No discussion, no second chances, just gone. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't about whether you're a good father or whether you're trying. This is about safety, about creating a life for our son that doesn't include looking over his shoulder or being used as leverage. Dante thought about the federal raid happening right now, about the delicate web of illegal operations that funded his empire. He thought about his enemies, and there were many, who would absolutely use a child as pressure if they knew one existed. What if I got out? The words surprised him as much as they clearly surprised Elena. What? Out of the illegal operations, the dangerous parts. Dante's mind was already racing through possibilities, calculating what it would take. I have legitimate businesses, real estate, investments, the foundation. What if I transitioned everything, stepped back from the parts that put you and Luca at risk? Elena stared at him like he'd suggested flying to the moon. That's your entire empire, Dante. That's everything you've built. Exactly. And what good is an empire if it costs me my family? Your family, Elena repeated softly, testing the words. Is that what we are? I want you to be. Dante released her hand, giving her space. I know we're not there yet. I know I have to earn it. But yes, Elena, I want us to be a family, a real one. Not three people sharing space out of necessity, but an actual unit. Together. She wrapped her arms around herself, looking younger and more uncertain than Dante had seen her since the hospital. I don't know if that's possible. There's so much broken between us. Then we fix it, piece by piece, day by day. He gestured to Luca. We already made something incredible together. Why can't we fix what we broke? Because fixing requires both people to change, Elena said quietly. And I don't know if I can trust you enough to let you back in. Not after everything. It was honest, brutal, and completely fair. Dante nodded slowly. Then we start there. Not with trust, but with consistency. I show up. I make different choices. I prove through actions that I'm serious. And eventually, maybe you can risk believing in me again. Elena looked at him for a long moment, then at their son sleeping peacefully, despite the chaos of adult emotion swirling around him. No promises, she said finally. No promises, Dante agreed, but I won't leave in 6 weeks, not yet. She pulled her robe tighter, a gesture of self-protection. I'll stay longer, see how this plays out. But Dante, the moment I feel like you're slipping back into old patterns, you're gone, I know. She nodded, then moved toward the door, paused, looked back. For what it's worth, I'm glad you stayed tonight instead of running to the crisis. Then she was gone, leaving Dante alone with his sleeping son and the profound realization that he'd just made a choice he could never unmake. By staying home, by delegating to Vincent, by choosing his family over the immediate demands of the empire, he'd crossed a line he'd never thought he'd cross. And the terrifying part was that it felt right. Dante's phone buzzed again on the dresser. Vincent, probably, with updates or problems that needed solving. Dante ignored it, returning his attention to Luca, who was starting to stir again. It's okay, he murmured, lifting his son carefully. I've got you. I'm right here. And for the first time in his life, Dante Moretti meant it completely. Morning came with pale winter light filtering through the penthouse windows. Dante had managed maybe 2 hours of sleep, but when he walked into the kitchen at 6:30, he felt more awake than he had in months. Elena was already there, making coffee with one hand while holding Luca against her shoulder with the other. You look terrible, she observed, though her tone was softer than the words suggested. I feel terrible. Dante reached for a mug. But I'm here. Yes, you are. Elena shifted Luca slightly, studying Dante's face. Vincent called my phone around 5, said you weren't answering. Dante's hand stilled on the coffee pot. What did you tell him? That you were with your son and you'd call him when you were ready. She paused. He sounded stressed, said there were decisions that needed to be made. There always are. Dante poured his coffee, the rich smell cutting through his exhaustion. But they can wait until I get to the office. Can they? Elena's question wasn't a challenge, more like genuine curiosity. I don't actually know how your world works. What happens when you're not there immediately to fix things? Historically? Chaos. Dante took a long drink, feeling the caffeine start to work. But that's because I never let anyone else make real decisions. Vincent's capable, more capable than I've given him credit for. Last night proved that. Elena moved to the table, settling into a chair with Luca. What happened? With the raid? Dante hesitated. This was the line they'd never successfully navigated during their marriage. How much of his world to share, how much to shield her from. Elena had wanted honesty, but honesty about illegal operations came with its own dangers. The truth? He asked. Always. Federal agents raided one of my warehouses. It was clean, nothing illegal stored there, but they're using it as justification for broader investigations. Dante sat across from her, cradling his coffee. Vincent coordinated with our attorneys, made sure everyone followed protocols, protected the information that needed protecting. By the time I called him this morning, the immediate crisis was contained. And the long-term crisis? That's where it gets complicated. Dante met her eyes. I meant what I said last night, about getting out of the dangerous parts. But Elena, that's not something I can do overnight. There are obligations, territories, people who depend on those operations. Walking away requires careful planning. Or it requires courage. Elena's voice was gentle but firm. You could just stop, Dante. Sell everything. Walk away. Start over with the legitimate businesses. And leave a power vacuum that would start a war. Dante shook his head. I understand what you're asking, but it's not that simple. If I just disappear, every small operator tries to grab what I built. People die. Innocents get caught in the crossfire. So you're saying you can't leave because you're too important? There was an edge to Elena's tone now. That's the same justification you used during our marriage. I can't step back, Elena. Too many people depend on me. The Empire needs me. No. Dante set down his coffee, leaning forward. I'm saying I need to leave responsibly. Hand over territories to people who won't turn them into war zones. Transition the operations to someone who can maintain stability. That takes time, but I'm willing to do it. For you. For Luca. Elena searched his face, looking for the lie she expected to find. How much time? A year? Maybe 18 months? Dante saw her expression tighten and continued quickly. I know that sounds like a long time, but Elena, I'm talking about dismantling an empire I spent 20 years building. It has to be done carefully, or people get hurt. And in the meantime, while you're carefully dismantling, what happens to us? We do exactly what we're doing now. We live together.